Hi and welcome to another episode of ReaperTV. In this video we're going to take a look at working with effects parameters and automation. So for example, we may want to have a wah effect as part of a track, but we don't necessarily want to have that recorded during the actual performance. We want to assign that later. Well, you can do things like that with it. So I'm going to take you step by step through how you set these things up, how you assign the parameters, how you record those parameters, and how you can keep them separate and build up some really cool effects. So let's take a look at how all that's done right now. Now at first this may look quite complex when we're doing it, but once you understand the principle behind it, it's fairly straightforward. And the beauty of working this way is the fact that you can have multiple different parameters being affected at the same time and have control over each one of those parameters independently. So using the example of a wah pedal, we could have one that has a wah on there, and we may want to have a phaser effect that sort of comes in and out and swells, where we could assign that to a second independent effects track that's automated, and then you can control them both independently, and when they play back they'll have the effect set up on there. So for this we need a couple of different things. Now you're not tied to doing this, you can still create these automation tracks manually and you can tweak them and adjust them. You don't need to have a MIDI controller or some kind of MIDI interface. But just for ease I'm going to be using a nano control, which is a Korg nano control, which is a simple little surface that allows me to control sliders and faders and so on, and I can assign various different controls to those individual MIDI assignable parameters. So we've got a piece of music in front of me and I'm just going to simply link this down to just the guitar track. So if we take a listen to that on its own, it is literally just a simple guitar track, a DI, and we have an effect parameter on there. So if we open that up, we can take a look at what we have, and you'll see that I'm just using an instance of Easy Mix 2. So all very, very easy. So the next thing we need to do is start assigning these parameters before we can then assign the MIDI controller to it. So let's just say, for example, you can see I've got gain set up in there at the moment. Well, I might want to assign something different to that. So what we can do is we can come up to the parameter option and we can come down to parameter effects list or effects parameter list, and then we can say show in track controls. We can also say show track envelopes. So this is where we take it a little bit different to what we did the last time. If we put the track controls and display it in there, it'll simply display like we have the gain parameter on the left hand side for this particular track. But if we show it in the track envelopes, we can now take that and we can use the automation envelopes and control those, and we can assign any other parameters that are assignable to it. So for example, you can see we've got gain, shape 2, output, input, bypass and wet. So for this example, let's go through and just say we're going to use the wet signal. So we're going to click on that. You can see once I've done that, that now opens up an automation lane that allows me to control that specific parameter, which in this case is the wet and dry control. And you can see what it does is it now tells us we've got wet, easy mix. So it tells us what we're using. Now, like I say, if we want to, we can easily come back up and do exactly the same again. So we can come to parameter, come down to effects parameter list, show track envelope, and this time we can say let's put the gain in there. So now you can see we now have two sets of controls in there. We've got the wet easy mix and the gain easy mix. So each one of those now becomes independent of the other, and we can control and mix them and do everything we want, and it's all fully automated. And the beauty of this is that this automation is only applicable inside Reaper. So we're not having to worry about this being something that's permanently applied to the actual MIDI, the actual recording itself. That stays as a DI signal, completely unaffected. Everything is done inside the wet and the gain tracks. So before we move on, I want to assign the individual effects parameters to a MIDI control surface. So you can see where we've got these automation lanes pulled up, we've got the option for MIDI learn. If I click on that, you can see that brings up the MIDI Learn OSC command dialog box. And it tells us what this will do. So you can see the command in there, we can manually input that if we want to, but Reaper is intelligent enough that once I make any adjustment to the control surface, that particular MIDI command will be passed over to it. So I'll just use the first controller on my control surface, and you'll see that now comes up and says MIDI channel 1 CC7. So that's now mapped that specific controller on our MIDI device into Reaper and to that particular effect parameter. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So once we've done that, we'll now click on OK. So we now have access to that. So if we try using the control surface now, absolutely nothing happens. So you can see nothing is changing on the screen. We need to do a couple of other things before we go any further with this. So what I need to do now is enable the ability to trim or to do any of those kind of effects on there. So at the moment, all I need to do is come up to this, and this is our track envelope, and you can see we've got automation mode, trim, and read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that down to right. That will then enable all of those tracks and start to allow me to control them. So you'll see we've got a little check next to wet and next to gain. They're visible, they're armed, and so on. And if we take a look at our actual track control panel on the left hand side, you can see now that right is enabled and both of these are now switched on. So at the moment we only have MIDI learn set up for the wet and dry kind of mix. Nothing has been set up for the gain just yet. We'll control that independently. We'll go back and take a look at that in a moment. But you'll see the controller is now set to 100%, and if I use the dial and I start to adjust things on there, and now when I use the controller, you'll see that that now adjusts the wet and dry mix. So you can see the line goes up and down, and the meter, so the slider goes up and down as well. Okay, that's great. We've now set everything up. The next thing we can do is start to play the track back, and we can then, in real time, control the way that effect is being controlled. So let me just play the track back a second, and you'll see as I do this, it'll start to record the edits that I'm making alongside the track playback. So this is all being done in real time. So we'll rewind. I don't need to hit record because I'm not recording anything inside the actual audio itself. I'm only recording the automation. So let's just hit play. And you can see as I play the track back and I adjust the controller, the control surface, you see that the automation is being displayed. And if we zoom in a little bit, you can see all of my intricate little movements are now being recorded on there. So when I play that back without touching the control surface, all of those effects, all of those modulation effects, all those parameters that I'm adjusting, all those different things using the control surface to do, they're all being played back. So let's disable the ability to write that automation by clicking on the little symbol and setting that back to read. Drop that down, and that's now disabled all that. Now when we play it back, it won't affect anything we've recorded. So let's just play that back. So, pretty cool. You can see all of that has now been written into the track, but if I disable that or mute that and turn that off completely, it will not affect the actual original recordings. So we're not limited to just having one track set up like that or one set of parameters we can adjust. We can easily come in, and as many options as we have on the control surface, we can use those. So let's just say for this example, we want to also control the gain. We can just simply come to MIDI learn. This time we're going to choose a different part of our control surface. So you'll see that gives us a different MIDI control surface controller. We'll click OK on that. And now when we come in and enable this so we can start recording that automation, we just simply click on read again and just change that to be right. That now becomes armed, and I'll just rewind the track back a bit. If I use that controller, you can now see those parameters change. So you can see everything being updated in real time, and if I hit play now, now there's one thing you notice there, that this track is also recording, and because we're not making any changes to that, it's overwriting everything we've done previously. Now that's not something you really want to happen. You may want to do like I've done, where you've got multiple different parameters that you want to affect, but you want to build them up one at a time. Well, the last thing you want to do is to end up overwriting the previous things. So let's take a look at how we can disable that problem. So in the same way that we can arm and disarm tracks to record something, we can do the same with the automation lanes. So you can see we've got these little arm for recording buttons, which in this instance are green. All we need to do to disable the problem of overwriting previously recorded steps is simply click on that and disable it. And once we do that, you'll see the red highlight that says this is armed for recording and also set up to be automated will be disabled. So now when we rewind that back and we'll press play, I'll now make changes to the second modulation effect, or the second parameter, and you'll see that the first one, the easy mix wet, won't be affected now. All pretty cool. Like I say, so that gives you a huge amount of control of what you want to do, and you can use any kind of MIDI control surface. So if you've got a MIDI controller for a foot controller and you want to use it for volume or for wah, all you need to do is map that parameter to these particular automation lanes, and then you can easily make those changes in real time, but you're only actually recording what you're doing. You're recording those motions. So we've created a couple of different sort of modulation effects or volume effects or wet and dry mixes and so on. But look at the number of points we have on there. It's not particularly smooth. You know, you're kind of limited to your ability to create really smooth transitions. Well, we can use Reaper to go through and fine tune those. So what we can do is we can right click and drag over all these points, and that'll select them. Now, once we do that, we can right click on there, and we've got a couple of options available to us. And the one that we're going to look at is right down towards the bottom. We've got reduce the number of points. So we can click on that. And what that'll do is it gives us a slider and tells us at the moment we've got 257 points selected. So I can use this slider, and as I do, we'll see once I let go, it'll reduce the number of points that are used in there. And by reducing the points, we kind of smooth the transition out. So you can see instead of having sort of 270 kind of points, we've now got 75. And we've got pretty much the same shape on there with a lot less points, which will smooth those things out. Well, there you go. That's pretty much how you do it. That's what I wanted to cover in this video. So like I've said, and I used the example of a wah pedal. It was asked on the previous video, and I think this is a great way of doing it. So if you've got something along the lines of bias effects, then you can use the wah pedal in there, assign the relevant parameter to one of these modulation tracks, use some kind of MIDI controller to control it, and then you can build up that wah effect or the volume swells and things. You can fine tune and tweak that to make sure you get an absolutely perfect performance without affecting the actual underlying direct input track. Well, I hope you found this video. I hope it's given you an insight into how you can use these parameters to control your audio recordings and how you can get really creative with something after the fact. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all the new content we add every single week. And if you've got any comments, questions, or feedback on this video or anything else we cover on the channel, please pop those in the comments section below. And until next time, happy mixing.